I arrived at Pinnacle Financial on a Tuesday morning to find my access revoked and HR waiting. Security escorted me out like a criminal while colleagues stared. 3 years of dedicated work erased in minutes. My boss claimed budget cuts, but I knew I had discovered something in the quarterly reports that made powerful people nervous. As they confiscated my laptop and company phone, I remembered my personal security badge still hanging around my neck. They forgot about the comprehensive access logs. It contained logs that could unravel everything I had stumbled upon. The humiliation burned worse than any physical pain as I sat in my Honda Civic in the parking garage, watching my former colleagues stream past my car window. Some avoided eye contact while others whispered behind cupped hands. I was Jamie Thompson, 28 years old, and until this morning, I had been Pinnacle Financial's rising star senior data analyst. Now I was unemployed, escorted out like some common thief who had been caught stealing office supplies. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, replaying every moment of the morning's devastation. Richard Sterling himself had been there, standing behind the HR director with that cold smile I had seen him use on competitors. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable, but his eyes held something darker than disappointment. They held calculation. The drive home to my studio apartment in downtown Denver felt like a funeral procession. Every red light gave me more time to think about how quickly my life had crumbled. My rent was due in 2 weeks. My student loans wouldn't pause for unemployment. The promotion I had been promised was now someone else's opportunity. But as I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, something nagged at the back of my mind. Sterling's explanation about budget cuts didn't match the company's recent hiring spree in other departments. They had just brought on 6 new executives and leased 2 additional floors in the building. Companies don't eliminate essential positions during expansion periods. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at my small dining table, staring at the security badge that still hung from the retractable cord around my neck. The plastic rectangle felt heavier now, weighted with possibility I hadn't considered before. Pinnacle Financial used state-of-the-art access control systems that tracked every door entry, every computer login, every server connection. Opening my personal laptop, I navigated to the employee portal that somehow remained active despite my termination. The oversight would probably be corrected within hours, but for now, I still had access to my employment records. I clicked on the Security Access History tab and began downloading months of data. What I found made my coffee grow cold as I stared at the screen in disbelief. During a system maintenance night 6 months ago, my security credentials had experienced what the logs described as a temporary elevation error. For nearly 4 hours on that October evening, my badge had possessed administrative-level access to systems I had never seen before. I remembered that night vaguely. I had been working late on routine quarterly analysis when my computer froze and restarted. When it came back online, the desktop looked different and several unfamiliar applications were running. I had assumed IT was pushing updates and continued working on my spreadsheets. But according to these logs, I had accessed Richard Sterling's private executive server during those hours. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the detailed timestamps. The system showed I had opened files labeled Project Clearwater Executive Communications and Board Confidential. File names that meant nothing to me then, but sent chills down my spine now. I had also accessed restricted areas of the building that required executive-level clearance floors I had never physically visited, but somehow my badge had logged entry to. The technical glitch had granted me temporary God mode access to Pinnacle Financial's most sensitive systems, and everything I had inadvertently viewed was meticulously recorded. I began printing page after page of access logs, my small inkjet printer working overtime, as the scope of what I had accidentally discovered became clear. Project Clearwater wasn't just a corporate initiative, it was a money laundering operation that funneled client investments through shell companies Sterling personally owned. The board meeting recordings I had unknowingly accessed contained discussions about manipulating client portfolios to hide massive theft. Sterling wasn't just embezzling funds, he was systematically destroying retirement accounts belonging to teachers, firefighters, and factory workers who trusted Pinnacle Financial with their life savings. The shell companies had names like Mountain Vista Holdings and Rocky Peak Investments designed to sound legitimate while serving as vehicles for Sterling to transfer millions of dollars into his personal accounts. The operation was sophisticated, involving fake investment vehicles, manipulated audit reports, and forged regulatory filings. As I continued reading, the scope of Sterling's crimes expanded beyond simple theft. He was bribing city officials to secure municipal investment contracts, paying off federal auditors to overlook discrepancies, and even threatening potential whistleblowers with career destruction or worse. The evidence painted a picture of a criminal enterprise masquerading as a respectable financial institution. My termination suddenly made perfect sense. Someone had discovered that my security badge had accessed these sensitive systems. Sterling couldn't risk me remembering what I had seen or investigating further. The budget cuts excuse was a convenient cover for eliminating a potential threat, but they had made a crucial mistake. In their rush to remove me from the building, they had forgotten to confiscate my security badge or immediately revoke my access to the employee portal. For a few precious hours, I had a window to gather evidence that could expose everything. I printed financial documents showing Sterling's personal accounts receiving transfers from client portfolios. Communication logs revealed his conversations with corrupt officials. Surveillance footage showed late-night meetings with individuals whose names appeared on federal watch lists. Everything was time-stamped, documented, and irrefutable. As my printer finally fell silent, I stared at the stack of evidence covering my dining table. I held proof that Richard Sterling was running one of the largest financial fraud operations in Colorado history. But I also realized that possessing this information made me incredibly dangerous to very powerful people. The employee portal suddenly displayed an access denied message. My window had closed, but the damage to Sterling's operation was already done. I had downloaded everything I needed to bring down his empire, and he had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed with a text from my former colleague Sarah Martinez asking if I was okay. Sarah had been my closest friend at Pinnacle Financial, the person I trusted most in the office. Maybe she could help me understand what had really happened and what I should do next. I needed an ally, and Sarah had always been someone I could count on. But as I prepared to call her, something in her text message struck me as odd. She had used the phrase, "Hope you're staying safe," instead of her usual casual tone. It felt more like a warning than friendly concern. Still, I needed answers, and Sarah might be my only source of inside information about Sterling's next moves. The coffee shop on 16th Street hummed with typical Tuesday afternoon energy as I waited for Sarah in our usual corner booth. Business people hurried past the windows carrying laptops and coffee cups, living the productive professional lives I had enjoyed just hours earlier. The normalcy felt surreal when my own world had been turned completely upside down. Sarah arrived 15 minutes late, which was unusual for someone who prided herself on punctuality. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun rather than her typical polished style, and dark circles under her green eyes suggested she hadn't slept well. She kept glancing at her phone and checking the entrance as if expecting someone to follow her. We had been friends since my first week at Pinnacle Financial 3 years ago. Sarah was the senior accountant who had shown me where to find good lunch spots and warned me about which executives to avoid. She had celebrated my promotions and commiserated about difficult clients over countless coffee breaks. If anyone would understand the injustice of my termination, it would be Sarah. But something felt wrong from the moment she sat down across from me. Her usual warm smile seemed forced, and she fidgeted with her coffee cup instead of making her normal steady eye contact. When I began explaining how Sterling had fired me over supposed budget cuts, despite the company's obvious expansion, Sarah's reaction seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. My instincts sharpened as I carefully probed for information about what had really happened. I mentioned finding irregularities in the quarterly financial reports I had been analyzing, watching Sarah's face carefully for her response. The flash of recognition in her eyes told me she already knew exactly what I was talking about. Sarah had been my primary contact for accessing historical financial data. Every report I analyzed had been processed through her department first. If there were irregularities in the numbers I had been studying, Sarah would have seen them long before they reached my desk. Her nervous energy wasn't surprise about my termination. It was guilt about her role in it. The pieces began falling into place as I pressed her with increasingly specific questions about the accounting procedures for Sterling's special projects. Sarah knew about Project Clearwater. She had been involved in processing the financial transactions I had accidentally discovered. Her friendship with me hadn't been coincidental, it had been assigned. When I directly confronted her about monitoring my work, Sarah's composure finally cracked. Tears began flowing as she confessed that Sterling had recruited her 18 months ago, shortly after her mother Linda had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The experimental treatments Linda needed weren't covered by insurance, and the costs were bankrupting their family. Sterling had approached Sarah personally, offering to cover all of Linda's medical expenses through a company charity fund. In exchange, Sarah needed to keep him informed about my data analysis, projects, and alert him if I discovered anything sensitive. She had never expected me to stumble onto something so dangerous. Sarah revealed that she had been altering my reports for months, changing numbers to hide Sterling's money laundering tracks before they reached my final analysis. The guilt had been destroying her, but she felt trapped between her mother's survival and her loyalty to me. Sterling had made it clear that refusing his arrangement would result in both Sarah and her mother facing serious consequences. The betrayal cut deeper than my termination. My best friend had been sabotaging my work while pretending to support my career. Every promotion I had earned was suspect because Sarah had been manipulating the data I used to prove my analytical skills. The person I trusted most had been working against me for over a year. But Sarah's confession contained information that terrified me more than her betrayal. Sterling knew about my security badge accessing his private systems. He had been planning my removal for weeks, waiting for the right moment to eliminate the threat without drawing attention. Sarah warned me that Sterling was already working with his connections in law enforcement to have me arrested on fabricated corporate espionage charges. According to Sarah, Sterling had powerful allies throughout Colorado's political and legal systems. The police chief, federal prosecutor, and several city council members were all receiving payments through his shell companies. They would be eager to help him silence someone who threatened their lucrative arrangement. As Sarah continued her tearful confession, I noticed we were being watched. 2 men in dark suits had been sitting at separate tables when I arrived, but they had positioned themselves to observe our conversation. One was reading a newspaper without turning pages, while the other stared at his laptop screen without typing. Professional surveillance that confirmed Sterling was already tracking my movements. Sarah begged me to leave town immediately to disappear before Sterling could have me arrested or worse. She explained that the federal auditor who had previously investigated Pinnacle Financial had died in a suspicious car accident after getting too close to the truth. The journalist who had been asking questions about Sterling's political connections had suffered a convenient heart attack despite being a marathon runner in perfect health. Sterling's reach extended far beyond financial crime. He was willing to eliminate anyone who threatened his operation, and he had the connections to make those eliminations look accidental. My discovery of his money laundering scheme had marked me for destruction, and Sterling was moving quickly to neutralize the threat. But as Sarah described the scope of Sterling's criminal network, my fear transformed into determination. He wasn't just stealing money from wealthy investors. He was destroying the retirement savings of working-class families, teachers who had spent decades contributing to pension funds that Sterling was systematically looting. The victims were people like my own parents who had trusted financial institutions to protect their modest savings. I realized that running away would condemn countless innocent people to financial ruin While Sterling continued expanding his operation, someone had to stop him, and the evidence on my security badge might be the only proof capable of bringing down his empire. Even if the personal cost was enormous, I couldn't live with myself knowing I had the power to expose Sterling but chose safety over justice. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message that made her face go pale. Sterling's assistant was demanding an immediate report on our conversation. The surveillance wasn't just observing, it was actively monitoring us. Sarah stood quickly apologizing through tears as she explained that staying longer would endanger both of us. As Sarah hurried toward the front exit, I slipped out through the coffee shop's rear door into the alley behind the building. I could hear footsteps following me as Sterling's security team realized I had evaded their surveillance. The chase was beginning, and I was completely alone in a fight against one of Colorado's most powerful men. But I wasn't going to run. I was going to find a way to use my accidental discovery to destroy Sterling's operation and save his victims. The security badge hanging around my neck contained the evidence needed to bring justice, and I was determined to ensure that evidence reached the right people before Sterling could silence me forever. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I weaved through the crowded food court at Cherry Creek Mall, using the Tuesday afternoon shopping crowd as camouflage. The black SUVs that had been following me since leaving the coffee shop were now circling the parking garage, their occupants speaking into radio devices with the precision of military operations. I ducked into a clothing store and pretended to browse while researching former Pinnacle Financial employees on my phone. If Sterling had been systematically removing threats to his operation, there might be other victims who could help me fight back. The company directory I had downloaded months ago for our office contact project now served as a roadmap to potential allies. David Chen's name jumped out immediately. Pinnacle Financial's former head of security had been terminated 2 weeks before my own firing officially for performance issues that seemed completely inconsistent with his exemplary 15-year career. David had been responsible for protecting the company's most sensitive information, which meant he would have had access to Sterling's private systems and potentially discovered the same evidence I had stumbled upon. A quick online search revealed that David had started working as a security consultant for Brooks and Associates, a small firm specializing in corporate risk assessment. Their office was located in a modest building in the tech corridor far from the glass towers where Sterling conducted his operation. If David was willing to meet with me, he might be the ally I desperately needed. The drive across town required careful route planning to avoid Sterling's surveillance network. I took surface streets through residential neighborhoods, doubled back through shopping center parking lots, and switched vehicles twice using car-sharing services. The techniques felt like something from a spy movie, but the stakes were real enough to justify extreme caution. Brooks and Associates occupied a small suite on the 3rd floor of a building that housed technology startups and consulting firms. The receptionist was a college student who seemed more interested in her textbook than screening visitors. When I asked to speak with David Chen about a security consultation, she waved me toward his office without asking for identification. David's office was spartanly furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered in security certifications and commendation letters from his years at Pinnacle Financial. The man himself was in his mid-40s with graying temples and the alert posture of someone trained to notice threats. His initial reaction to my unscheduled visit was professional suspicion rather than welcome. I introduced myself as a former Pinnacle Financial employee who had been terminated under suspicious circumstances, but David's expression remained guarded. He had clearly learned to be cautious about unexpected visitors, bearing stories about his former employer. When I mentioned discovering irregularities in Sterling's financial operations, David's demeanor shifted to active wariness. It wasn't until I showed him printouts of my security access logs that David's professional mask slipped. His eyes widened as he recognized the significance of what I was showing him, and for the first time since entering his office, I saw genuine emotion cross his face. relief mixed with excitement as he realized I possessed evidence that could validate everything he had suspected. David's story unfolded in careful, measured sentences that revealed the depth of Sterling's operation. As head of security, David had been responsible for monitoring access to sensitive systems and investigating potential breaches. Over the past 2 years, he had noticed unusual patterns in executive-level access logs that suggested Sterling was conducting activities outside normal business operations. The security cameras David monitored had recorded late-night meetings between Sterling and individuals who weren't employees or registered visitors. Financial transactions were being processed through systems designed for routine operations, but the amounts and destinations didn't match any legitimate business purpose. Sterling's office had been equipped with additional surveillance equipment that bypassed the main security network, creating a private monitoring system David couldn't access. When David had attempted to investigate these irregularities through official channels, he had been blocked at every turn. His requests for additional information were denied, his access to certain systems was restricted, and his direct supervisor began questioning his judgment. The message was clear. David was getting too close to something Sterling wanted hidden. The final confrontation had come when David discovered that Sterling's security cameras had recorded private meetings with Mayor Patricia Williams' police chief Robert Martinez and federal prosecutor Jennifer Thompson. The recordings showed briefcases changing hands and conversations about protecting certain investigations from unwanted scrutiny. David was witnessing evidence of high-level political corruption centered around Sterling's financial operations. David's termination had been swift and decisive once Sterling realized the scope of his discovery. The official reason was performance issues, but David understood he was being eliminated before he could expose Sterling's criminal network. He had been quietly building a case against Sterling ever since gathering evidence and identifying other victims who might be willing to testify. The revelation that David had been preparing his own investigation transformed my situation completely. I was no longer a lone individual fighting impossible odds against a powerful criminal. David had resources, experience, and most importantly, a detailed understanding of Sterling's operations that complemented the digital evidence I had accidentally obtained. David explained that Sterling's mistake wasn't just underestimating one person, it was systematically creating enemies throughout his organization. Dr. Emily Foster, the former compliance officer, had been poisoned but survived and was now willing to testify about Sterling's attempts to silence her. Marcus Johnson, a former senior accountant, had copies of deleted financial records that proved Sterling's theft. Lisa Wong, Sterling's former executive secretary, had recorded phone conversations that implicated Sterling's political allies. But David's most valuable asset was Margaret Sterling, the CEO's wife of 20 years. Margaret had been secretly documenting her husband's crimes for months, waiting for the right opportunity to escape an increasingly abusive marriage while ensuring Sterling faced justice for his actions. She possessed access to Sterling's personal files, including evidence of murders he had committed to protect his operation. The pieces of a comprehensive attack on Sterling's empire were falling into place, but the operation required precise coordination and timing. David had been planning to move against Sterling during an upcoming charity gala, where all of his corrupt associates would be present in one location. My security badge evidence provided the final component needed to ensure their case was airtight. However, our alliance had attracted unwanted attention. David's receptionist called to warn us that men in suits were asking questions about my visit to their office. Sterling's security network had tracked my location, despite my efforts to avoid surveillance. We had minutes before they arrived to arrest or eliminate both of us. David moved with the efficiency of someone who had prepared for this contingency. He led me through a back exit that connected to the building's service corridors, then to a parking garage where he had positioned a vehicle for emergency escape. His planning extended beyond basic caution to genuine preparation for warfare against Sterling's organization. As we drove away from Brooks and Associates, David explained that our timeline had accelerated dramatically. Sterling Wu knew we were working together, which meant he would move quickly to eliminate all threats to his operation. The charity gala was still 5 days away, but we couldn't wait for the perfect moment when our lives were in immediate danger. Margaret Sterling had agreed to meet with us that evening at a secure location where she would provide access to Sterling's most incriminating evidence. Combined with my security logs and David's surveillance footage, we would have enough proof to bring down Sterling's entire criminal network. But we were now racing against time while Sterling's considerable resources were focused on stopping us before we could expose his crimes. The warehouse David led me to was located in an industrial area north of Denver, surrounded by shipping companies and manufacturing facilities that provided perfect camouflage for clandestine meetings. The building itself appeared abandoned from the outside with weathered siding and windows covered by plywood sheets, but David's key opened a side entrance that revealed a sophisticated operations center within. The interior had been transformed into a command post equipped with multiple computer workstations, communication equipment, and wall-mounted displays showing surveillance feeds from various locations around the city. File cabinets lined one wall, while a conference table dominated the center space, covered with documents, photographs, and evidence bags that represented months of careful investigation. Dr. Emily Foster was waiting for us, a woman in her early 50s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that held both determination and residual fear. As Pinnacle Financial's former compliance officer, she had been responsible for ensuring the company followed federal regulations and maintained ethical business practices. Sterling's criminal operations had put her in an impossible position that ultimately led to an attempt on her life. Emily's story was both horrifying and inspiring. She had discovered Sterling's money laundering operation through routine compliance audits that revealed suspicious transaction patterns. When she attempted to report these irregularities to federal authorities, Sterling had invited her to a private dinner where she was poisoned with a substance designed to simulate a heart attack. Only Emily's quick thinking in calling emergency services and her previous medical knowledge had saved her life. The hospital had treated her apparent heart attack as a natural medical event, but Emily knew the symptoms were inconsistent with cardiac failure. Blood tests she privately arranged revealed traces of exotic compounds that confirmed her poisoning. Sterling had attempted to murder her for threatening his operation, but his failure had created a witness with both motive and evidence to destroy him. Marcus Johnson joined our meeting shortly after my arrival, a nervous man in his 30s whose accounting expertise had uncovered the financial mechanisms Sterling used to hide stolen funds. Marcus had been downloading copies of sensitive financial records for months before his termination, creating a comprehensive paper trail that documented every aspect of Sterling's theft. The evidence Marcus presented was staggering in scope. Sterling had been systematically looting client accounts for over 5 years, transferring billions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate investment management. The victims included pension funds for teachers, police officers, and municipal employees who trusted Pinnacle Financial to protect their retirement savings. Lisa Wong completed our group, bringing audio recordings of Sterling's phone conversations that revealed the true extent of his criminal network. As Sterling's executive secretary for 7 years, Lisa had access to his private communications and had been secretly recording conversations that proved his corruption of government officials. Her recordings included Sterling arranging bribes, threatening potential witnesses, and ordering violence against people who opposed his operations. But the most crucial participant in our alliance joined us through encrypted video conference. Margaret Sterling appeared on the main display, speaking to us from what appeared to be her home office. The woman I saw was elegant and composed, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Margaret's revelation transformed everything we thought we knew about Sterling's operation. For the past 3 years, she had been secretly documenting her husband's crimes while enduring increasing isolation and abuse as he became more paranoid and violent. She possessed access to Sterling's personal safe, which contained physical evidence, backup drives, and written communications that proved his involvement in murder, corruption, and financial fraud. The evidence Margaret described was devastating. Sterling had personally killed 3 people who threatened his operation, federal auditor Thomas Walsh, who had been investigating Pinnacle Financial's regulatory compliance, investigative journalist Amanda Rivera, who had been researching Sterling's political connections, and City Council member Robert Kim, who had attempted to expose Sterling's corruption of municipal investment contracts. Margaret had video recordings of Sterling confessing to these murders during private conversations in their home. She had copies of Sterling's personal correspondence with hitmen and corrupt officials. Most importantly, she had financial records showing Sterling's personal accounts, receiving transfers from victims' life insurance policies, and business interests, proving his motive for their deaths. The plan Margaret proposed was audacious but achievable. Sterling was hosting a corporate dinner party the following evening for major investors and political allies. During the event, Margaret would access Sterling's home safe and retrieve all physical evidence, while David coordinated with trusted federal agents to simultaneously raid Sterling's business operations. My role in the operation was crucial. Using my security badge, I would remotely access Pinnacle Financial's servers during the dinner party when most security personnel would be focused on the event. I could download terabytes of financial data, communication logs, and transaction records while Margaret retrieved the physical evidence that proved Sterling's personal involvement in murder and corruption. However, Margaret warned us that Sterling was becoming increasingly suspicious of her behavior. He had installed additional surveillance equipment in their home and was monitoring her communications. The previous week, he had become violent during an argument about her charity work, suggesting he was beginning to suspect her loyalty. David explained that our timeline was extremely compressed. Sterling's security team was actively hunting for me, and his political allies were preparing warrants for my arrest on fabricated charges. We had perhaps 24 hours before Sterling's network moved to eliminate all threats permanently. The operation had to succeed on the first attempt because we wouldn't survive long enough for a second chance. The federal agents David had been working with were members of a joint task force investigating political corruption in Colorado. They had been building cases against several of Sterling's associates, but lacked the comprehensive evidence needed to prosecute the entire network. Our evidence would provide the foundation for simultaneous arrests that would prevent Sterling's allies from destroying evidence or fleeing the jurisdiction. As we finalized operational details, Margaret's video feed suddenly cut out. When David attempted to re-establish contact, we received only an automated message stating that her internet connection was unavailable. The loss of communication could be technical difficulties, or it could mean that Sterling had discovered Margaret's betrayal. David's radio crackled with an urgent message from his federal contacts. Sterling's security team had surrounded the warehouse and was preparing to assault our position. Somehow, despite our precautions, Sterling had tracked our location and was moving to eliminate everyone involved in the conspiracy against him. The battle for justice was about to become a literal fight for survival. As David distributed body armor and communication equipment, I realized that exposing Sterling's crimes would require us to survive the next few hours against professional killers who had no intention of allowing witnesses to their operation. Floodlights suddenly illuminated the warehouse exterior as Sterling's security team took positions around the building. Through the plywood-covered windows, I could see tactical vehicles and armed personnel establishing a perimeter that would prevent any escape from our supposed sanctuary. David moved with military precision, activating electronic countermeasures and preparing defensive positions while coordinating with his federal contacts. The radio communications we intercepted revealed the scope of Sterling's response. 20 operatives had surrounded the warehouse, while additional teams were moving to arrest Dr. Foster, Marcus Johnson, and Lisa Wong at their homes. Sterling wasn't just trying to silence our current group, he was systematically eliminating every potential witness to his criminal operations. David led us through a hidden passage he had constructed during his preparation of the warehouse facility. The tunnel connected to the storm drain system beneath the industrial complex, providing an escape route that Sterling's team hadn't anticipated. As we crawled through the narrow concrete passage, David explained that he had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario. We emerged 3 blocks away from the warehouse inside a maintenance building that David had stocked with additional supplies and communication equipment. From our new position, we could observe Sterling's operation without being detected. His security team was conducting a systematic search of the empty warehouse, clearly frustrated by our disappearance. But David's radio brought devastating news. Dr. Foster had been arrested at her apartment on charges of corporate espionage and conspiracy. Marcus Johnson had been found dead in his car, an apparent suicide that David immediately recognized as murder. Lisa Wong's house was empty, suggesting she had either escaped or been taken to an unknown location. The federal agents David had been coordinating with reported that their investigation had been compromised. Sterling's allies in the prosecutor's office had obtained warrants for the arrest of everyone involved in our conspiracy, including David and myself. The charges ranged from corporate espionage to terrorism, giving Sterling's security team legal authority to use lethal force during our apprehension. Margaret Sterling's situation remained unknown. Her video conference had ended abruptly, and all attempts to re-establish contact had failed. David's surveillance contacts reported unusual activity at Sterling's residence, with additional security personnel and what appeared to be medical personnel arriving at the property. As we monitored Sterling's communications, a chilling picture emerged. The entire evening's events had been orchestrated by Sterling from the beginning. He had allowed us to believe we were building a coalition against him, while actually drawing all his enemies into a coordinated trap that would eliminate every threat to his operation. Margaret Sterling's betrayal of her husband had been discovered weeks ago. Sterling had been feeding her false information while monitoring her communications with David. The evidence she claimed to possess was carefully crafted disinformation designed to lure us into exposing ourselves. Even worse, Margaret was now being held prisoner in her own home while Sterling used her to bait additional victims. The federal agents we trusted were revealed to be Sterling's operatives, feeding him intelligence about David's investigation while pretending to build a case against political corruption. The warehouse location had been compromised because David's federal contacts had provided Sterling with our operational details. We had walked directly into Sterling's trap while believing we were launching a surprise attack. But Sterling's overconfidence had created an opportunity he didn't anticipate. During our escape from the warehouse, I had managed to upload my security access logs to a secure cloud storage account that Sterling's team couldn't access. The evidence of his crimes was safely hidden where his technical resources couldn't reach it. More importantly, David revealed that his true federal contacts were members of a completely separate investigation that Sterling didn't know existed. Agent Patricia Wells and her FBI Financial Crimes Task Force had been building a case against Sterling's operation for over 2 years, using deep cover operatives who had infiltrated his organization at the highest levels. David himself was one of those operatives. His termination from Pinnacle Financial had been carefully orchestrated to provide him with access to Sterling's enemies while maintaining his cover as a disgruntled former employee. The Warehouse Command Center was an FBI operation designed to gather intelligence about Sterling's criminal network. Everything Sterling thought he knew about our investigation was carefully managed disinformation. While he was focused on eliminating the visible threats to his operation, the real federal investigation was preparing to destroy his entire criminal empire. My accidental discovery of Sterling's crimes had provided the final pieces of evidence needed to complete their case. Agent Wells contacted us directly through David's secure communication system, explaining that Sterling's violent response to our supposed threat had triggered the acceleration of their investigation. Federal arrest teams were moving into position to simultaneously raid Sterling's business operations, political allies, and personal residences. However, Agent Wells warned us that Sterling had become aware that his trap hadn't eliminated all threats to his operation. My escape with the digital evidence had triggered his emergency protocols for destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses. He was preparing to burn his warehouses, murder his political allies to prevent their testimony, and flee the country with whatever assets he could quickly liquidate. The federal operation had to move immediately to prevent Sterling from escaping justice and destroying evidence of his crimes. Agent Wells needed my security access logs to provide legal justification for the emergency raids, but obtaining that evidence required me to survive long enough to testify about what I had discovered. Sterling's security teams were systematically searching every building in the industrial complex where we were hiding. Professional hunters with military training and sophisticated equipment were closing in on our position. David's defensive preparations and federal support would help, but ultimately, our survival depended on staying ahead of Sterling's resources until the FBI could complete their operation. As emergency sirens began echoing across the city, I realized that the final confrontation with Sterling's criminal empire was beginning. The next few hours would determine whether justice would be served or whether Sterling would escape to continue destroying innocent lives from a new location. Agent Patricia Wells met us at the federal building downtown, a fortress-like structure with multiple security checkpoints and surveillance systems that finally made me feel safe from Sterling's reach. Wells was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the focused intensity of someone who had spent years building cases against dangerous criminals. Her team had been tracking Sterling's operation as part of a larger investigation into domestic organized crime networks. When I presented my security access logs and cloud storage evidence to Agent Wells, her reaction confirmed the significance of what I had accidentally discovered. The financial records revealed that Sterling's operation extended far beyond simple embezzlement into areas that made him one of the most dangerous criminals the FBI had ever investigated in Colorado. The timestamps and transaction records I had obtained showed that Sterling's late-night activities corresponded with wire transfers to known human trafficking networks operating across the southwestern United States. His shell companies weren't just hiding stolen investment funds, they were facilitating the transportation and sale of trafficked individuals through a network that stretched from Mexico to Canada. Agent Wells revealed that the FBI had been investigating Sterling's connection to missing persons cases for over 18 months. Dozens of young women and children had disappeared from cities where Sterling maintained business operations. The victims were primarily from vulnerable populations, undocumented immigrants, runaways, and people from economically disadvantaged communities who wouldn't be immediately missed. David's role as an undercover federal operative had provided crucial intelligence about Sterling's human trafficking operations. The charity dinners Sterling hosted weren't just covers for political corruption, they were sophisticated markets where trafficked individuals were sold to wealthy buyers from across the country. Sterling's Pinnacle Financial served as the payment processing system for these transactions, laundering money through legitimate appearing investment accounts. The evidence I had accidentally accessed included client lists for Sterling's trafficking operation. Prominent businessmen, political figures, and even law enforcement officials were purchasing human beings through Sterling's network. The scope of corruption extended to every level of Colorado's power structure, explaining how Sterling had operated with impunity for so many years. Margaret Sterling's situation was even worse than we had imagined. Agent Wells showed me surveillance footage proving that the woman we had been communicating with wasn't Sterling's wife at all. The real Margaret Sterling had been murdered 3 years ago after discovering her husband's trafficking operations. The woman posing as Margaret was Elena Vasquez Sterling's operations manager, who had undergone extensive plastic surgery to assume Margaret's identity. Elena had been feeding us disinformation while Sterling planned to eliminate everyone who threatened his operation. Her supposed evidence against Sterling was carefully crafted fiction designed to misdirect our investigation away from the trafficking network while identifying every person involved in building a case against him. But Sterling had underestimated the extent of the real federal investigation. Agent Wells' team had been infiltrating his operation at multiple levels, including placing undercover agents within his security force, accounting department, and political network. They possessed evidence of Sterling's crimes that he didn't know existed, including surveillance footage of trafficking operations and recorded conversations with his criminal associates. The challenge was that Sterling suspected federal surveillance and was preparing to eliminate all evidence by burning his warehouses and murdering everyone connected to his operations, including the trafficking victims currently being held in shipping containers at various locations around the city. Agent Wells needed my access logs immediately to obtain emergency warrants for simultaneous raids that would save lives and prevent the destruction of evidence. My security badge data provided the legal foundation for the largest federal operation in Colorado history. The detailed logs proved Sterling's personal involvement in every aspect of his criminal enterprise, from financial fraud to human trafficking to political corruption. Federal judges signed warrants for raids on 47 locations across 3 states, targeting Sterling's entire network simultaneously. The operational briefing revealed the scope of Sterling's trafficking empire. Victims were being held in warehouses, shipping containers, and modified basement facilities throughout the Denver metropolitan area. The operation involved over 200 individuals being transported, sold, and exploited through Sterling's network. Many of the victims were children who had been missing for months or years. Agent Wells insisted that I participate in the federal operation despite the personal danger involved. My intimate knowledge of Sterling's computer systems and building layouts made me invaluable for locating digital evidence and understanding the technical aspects of his operation. I would be equipped with federal protection and communication equipment while helping coordinate the simultaneous raids. The operation launched at 11:30 that night under the cover of darkness. Federal teams moved simultaneously against Sterling's mansion business offices, warehouse facilities, and the homes of his key associates. I was positioned in a mobile command center that allowed me to access Sterling's computer systems remotely while staying connected to the operational commanders. Sterling was arrested at his residence while attempting to destroy computer servers containing evidence of his crimes. The man who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just days earlier was reduced to a desperate criminal caught in the act of eliminating evidence. His mansion yielded terabytes of data documenting his trafficking operations, including video recordings of transactions and communications with buyers. The warehouse raids were even more successful than Agent Wells had anticipated. Federal teams rescued 63 trafficking victims from hidden facilities, including children as young as 12 who had been held captive for months. The victims were immediately provided with medical care and psychological support, while investigators documented the conditions they had endured. Elena Vasquez was captured at a private airfield while attempting to flee the country with Sterling's liquid assets. Her arrest led to the discovery of additional evidence about Sterling's international connections, including trafficking networks in Mexico and Central America that had been supplying victims for his operations. The scope of arrests extended throughout Colorado's political establishment. Mayor Williams, Police Chief Martinez, and Federal Prosecutor Thompson were taken into custody, along with a dozen other officials who had been protecting Sterling's operations in exchange for regular payments. The corruption network that had seemed impenetrable was dismantled in a single coordinated operation. But the most satisfying moment came when Sterling was confronted with my security access logs during his FBI interrogation. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his crimes documented in precise detail with timestamps and digital signatures, Sterling's arrogant facade finally collapsed. He confessed to years of trafficking, murder, and corruption, providing investigators with information needed to dismantle similar operations across the country. My accidental discovery had triggered the destruction of one of the largest criminal enterprises in American history. The evidence I stumbled upon while working late on routine financial analysis had saved dozens of lives and exposed a corruption network that reached into the highest levels of government. The security badge I had almost forgotten was carrying around my neck had become the key to delivering justice for countless victims. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching Richard Sterling receive a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The man who had once controlled millions of dollars and corrupted dozens of officials was now wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, his empire reduced to nothing more than evidence in filing cabinets. The federal investigation triggered by my security badge evidence had become the largest human trafficking prosecution in United States history. Sterling's conviction was followed by 43 additional guilty verdicts against his associates, including every corrupt official who had protected his operations. The conspiracy that had seemed untouchable just months earlier was completely destroyed. Elena Vasquez received a life sentence for her role in managing Sterling's trafficking operations and murdering the real Margaret Sterling. Her testimony provided investigators with detailed information about international trafficking networks, leading to arrests and rescues in 12 countries. The woman who had posed as Sterling's wife while facilitating the sale of human beings would spend the rest of her life in federal prison. Dr. Emily Foster was released from custody once the true scope of Sterling's operations became clear. Her supposed corporate espionage charges were revealed to be fabricated evidence created by Sterling's corrupt associates. Emily returned to compliance work, now specializing in helping companies identify and prevent the type of financial crimes that Sterling had perfected. Marcus Johnson's death was reclassified as homicide once investigators obtained evidence of Sterling's murder operations. His family received compensation from Sterling's seized assets, and Marcus was posthumously recognized as a whistleblower whose courage contributed to saving lives. His accounting expertise had been crucial in documenting Sterling's financial crimes. Lisa Wong survived Sterling's attempt to silence her and became a key witness in the federal prosecution. Her recorded conversations provided crucial evidence about Sterling's corruption of government officials and coordination with criminal networks. Lisa now works for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, using her inside knowledge to help investigate similar operations. David Chen received a commendation from the FBI for his undercover work that made Sterling's prosecution possible. His willingness to risk his career and safety to infiltrate Sterling's organization had provided investigators with intelligence that saved dozens of lives. David was promoted to lead the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force, dedicating his career to destroying operations like Sterling's. Agent Patricia Wells was recognized by the Department of Justice for supervising one of the most successful organized crime investigations in federal history. The techniques her team developed for infiltrating trafficking networks became standard procedures for FBI operations nationwide. Wells now trains other agents in combating financial crimes connected to human trafficking. The 63 trafficking victims rescued from Sterling's operations received comprehensive support services and legal assistance. Many were reunited with families who had searched for them desperately. Others began new lives with federal protection and educational opportunities. Every victim received financial compensation from Sterling's seized assets, which totaled over $200 million. Sterling's corruption network had been replaced by ethical officials committed to transparency and accountability. The new mayor, police chief, and federal prosecutor implemented reforms designed to prevent the type of systemic corruption that had allowed Sterling's operations to flourish. Colorado became a model for other states seeking to combat organized crime. Sarah Martinez contacted me to apologize for her role in Sterling's operations and to thank me for exposing the truth. Her mother, Linda, had completed successful cancer treatment using funds from Sterling's victim compensation program. Sarah now works for a nonprofit organization that supports families affected by financial crimes, dedicating her life to helping people avoid the impossible situation she had faced. But my own transformation was the most profound change of all. Losing my job at Pinnacle Financial had initially felt like a devastating setback that destroyed my career plans and financial security. I had been comfortable in my role as a data analyst, focused on advancing within the corporate structure and building a traditional professional life. The experience of fighting Sterling's criminal empire revealed capabilities and courage I never knew I possessed. Faced with powerful enemies and life-threatening danger, I had chosen justice over safety and truth over comfort. The process of exposing Sterling's crimes had shown me that my analytical skills could serve purposes far more important than corporate profit. I accepted a position as a federal consultant specializing in financial crime prevention. My experience with Sterling's operations made me uniquely qualified to help design security systems that automatically identify suspicious transactions and protect potential whistleblowers. The software I developed was implemented by financial institutions across the country, preventing other criminals from replicating Sterling's methods. The Federal Bureau of Investigation awarded me their Public Service Award for providing evidence that led to the rescue of trafficking victims and the destruction of a major criminal enterprise. But the recognition that meant the most came from the victims themselves, who thanked me personally for having the courage to fight when fighting seemed impossible. I established relationships with organizations combating human trafficking, using my experience to help them understand the financial mechanisms that enable these crimes. My security badge evidence had become a textbook case study in how seemingly routine corporate data could reveal massive criminal conspiracies when analyzed by someone with the expertise and determination to pursue the truth. The memorial garden created for Sterling's murder victims became a place I visited regularly, honoring the memory of people like federal auditor Thomas Walsh, journalist Amanda Rivera, and city council member Robert Kim. Their deaths reminded me that my survival carried the responsibility to continue fighting for justice on behalf of those who weren't as fortunate. My life had been completely transformed by the experience of losing everything I thought I wanted and discovering everything I actually needed. The comfortable corporate career I had been building seemed trivial compared to the satisfaction of knowing my work was protecting innocent people from predators like Sterling. The security badge that had accidentally logged my access to Sterling's criminal empire now sat framed on my desk, a reminder that justice sometimes emerges from the most unexpected sources. What had seemed like a devastating betrayal by my employer had actually been the beginning of discovering my true purpose in life. Looking back, I realized that Sterling's decision to fire me had been the best thing that ever happened to me. If I had remained comfortable in my position at Pinnacle Financial, I never would have discovered the evidence needed to save his victims. My willingness to fight for justice, despite personal cost, had not only destroyed Sterling's empire, but revealed my own capacity for courage I never knew existed. The experience taught me that losing everything you think you want can lead to finding everything you actually need. Sometimes the most devastating setbacks are actually opportunities to discover who you really are and what you're truly capable of achieving when fighting for something larger than yourself. Have you ever discovered something at work that made you question everything you thought you knew about your employer? Your courage to speak up might be the key to protecting others from harm. If this story inspired you to think about the power each of us has to fight injustice, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary courage when it mattered most. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who never expected to be heroes.